Emma Carter had always believed in love. She had spent her childhood watching romantic movies, dreaming of the day she would find someone who made her feel truly special. When she met Daniel Brooks, it felt like all those dreams were coming true. He was everything she had ever wanted, kind, charming, and attentive. Their relationship had been picture-perfect from the start. Daniel made grand romantic gestures, always knew the right words to say, and treated her like she was the most important person in the world. For 2 years, they had built a life together, and Emma was certain she had found the man she would spend forever with. Her friends often told her how lucky she was. Daniel wasn't just good to her, he was polite to everyone, always helping out and making people feel comfortable in his presence. He had a successful job in finance, was well-spoken, and never showed any signs of temper or aggression. To Emma, he was the ideal partner. Whenever she imagined their future, she saw a perfect life, a home filled with love, laughter, and happiness. She had never doubted him, not even for a second. On the night of her 27th birthday, Daniel planned something extraordinary. He told her to dress up for a special dinner, but he refused to give any details. Emma spent the whole afternoon getting ready, excited for what the evening would bring. When he picked her up, he handed her a bouquet of red roses, her favorite flowers. As they drove to the restaurant, she couldn't stop smiling. The venue he had chosen was elegant, with soft candlelight and a breathtaking view of the city skyline. It was the kind of place people went to for special occasions, and Emma felt like the luckiest woman alive. Throughout dinner, Daniel kept looking at her with a strange intensity. Emma thought he was just feeling emotional. It was her birthday, after all. They talked about their future, their dreams, and the life they wanted to build together. Emma had no idea what was coming next. As dessert arrived, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her heart pounded as he stood up, walked around the table, and got down on one knee. The entire restaurant fell silent. Emma felt a rush of emotions, joy, excitement, and overwhelming love. She had waited for this moment for so long, and now it was happening in the most perfect way. When Daniel opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring, she gasped. Tears welled up in her eyes as he asked her to marry him. She didn't even hesitate. She said yes, and the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Strangers cheered for them, and some even raised their glasses in celebration. Emma felt like she was living in a dream. As they left the restaurant, Emma held on to Daniel's hand tightly, feeling like nothing could ever go wrong. She had no way of knowing that in just 3 days, everything would come crashing down. 3 days after her engagement, Emma Carter was nowhere to be found. Her sudden disappearance sent waves of panic through her family and friends. Just days earlier, she had been glowing with excitement, eagerly discussing wedding plans and looking forward to her future with Daniel Brooks. She had called her mother the night before, talking endlessly about venues, color schemes, and guest lists. But then, without any warning, all communication stopped. Calls went straight to voicemail, text messages remained unread, and social media activity came to a complete halt. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. At first, her family tried to remain calm. Maybe she was just overwhelmed with all the wedding planning. Maybe she had gone on a spontaneous trip with Daniel. But as hours turned into a full day with no response, concern grew into fear. Emma was not the kind of person to ignore messages, especially not from her mother or best friends. Something was wrong. Her mother, Linda Carter, decided to check on her. She drove to Emma's apartment, hoping to find her there. But as she knocked on the door, there was no answer. She called Daniel, but he didn't pick up either. Now, full-blown panic set in. Linda contacted Emma's best friend, Jessica, who had also been trying to reach her with no success. It was then that they decided to call the police. The authorities arrived at Emma's apartment later that evening. The door was locked, and there were no immediate signs of forced entry. When the building's security team was asked to check surveillance footage, what they found was unsettling. The cameras showed Emma entering her building with Daniel the night before she went missing, but there was no footage of her leaving. It was as if she had never stepped outside again. Detectives began questioning neighbors, hoping someone had seen or heard anything unusual. A few neighbors recalled hearing faint noises that night, something that sounded like furniture being moved or an argument, but no one thought much of it at the time. Others mentioned that Daniel had left the apartment early in the morning, alone, carrying a duffel bag. He'd looked calm, not in a rush, but there was something unsettling about the way he walked out without turning back. The investigation quickly turned toward Daniel. When the police attempted to contact him, his phone was off, his apartment was locked, and when officers entered, they found it eerily empty. Clothes were gone from the closet, and some personal items were missing. It looked as though he had left in a hurry. That was when the truth became clear. Daniel wasn't just a concerned fiancé, he was missing too. And he was now the prime suspect in Emma's disappearance. What had seemed like a perfect love story just days ago was now a full-blown mystery. Emma's family held on to hope, praying she was still alive. But deep down, an unshakable fear was growing. They had no idea that soon, their worst nightmare would come true. 4 days after Emma Carter's disappearance, the search took a grim turn. A jogger running along a secluded wooded trail just outside the city made a horrifying discovery. Near a bend in the trail, partially covered by leaves and dirt, was what appeared to be a shallow grave. The jogger immediately called 911, and within the hour, police and forensic teams arrived at the scene. The area was quickly secured, and investigators began the delicate process of uncovering what was buried beneath the loose soil. As the dirt was carefully brushed away, the truth was revealed. A woman's body, wrapped in a bedsheet, lay in the shallow grave. Her face was bruised, her body covered in deep stab wounds, and her skull showed clear signs of blunt force trauma. Though her features were swollen and battered, detectives knew in their hearts who they had found. Hours later, the confirmation came. Emma Carter was dead. News of Emma's murder spread quickly. Her family, who had been holding on to hope, was devastated. Just days ago, they had been celebrating her engagement, believing she was about to begin the happiest chapter of her life. Now, they were preparing for her funeral. The reality of her brutal murder was almost too much to bear. Detectives worked quickly to piece together what had happened. The forensic team determined that Emma had likely been killed in her apartment before her body was transported to the wooded area. The stab wounds were deep and precise, suggesting a crime of rage rather than a random attack. The blunt force trauma to her skull indicated she had been struck with significant force, possibly with an object from her apartment. There were no signs of restraint, no evidence of robbery. Whoever had killed Emma had done so with clear intent. The case against Daniel Brooks grew stronger with every new piece of evidence. Surveillance footage showed him leaving Emma's apartment alone, carrying a duffel bag large enough to hold a body. His sudden disappearance only made him look more guilty. Investigators obtained a warrant for his phone records, uncovering something even more chilling. In the days leading up to Emma's death, Daniel had searched for disturbing things online: how to dispose of a body, how to clean up blood, and legal consequences of second-degree murder. He had even searched for information on how long it took for a human body to decompose in different conditions. These searches were not accidental, and they painted a terrifying picture. Daniel hadn't just lost control in a moment of anger. He had planned for this. But the most unsettling part was that Daniel Brooks was nowhere to be found. With his phone turned off, his bank accounts untouched, and no trace of his movements after Emma's murder, it was as if he had vanished. The man who had once seemed like the perfect fiancé was now the subject of a nationwide manhunt. Emma's story had started as a fairy tale, but now it had become a horrifying mystery. The search for Daniel was only beginning, and the deeper detectives dug, the more disturbing his past became. As investigators delved deeper into Daniel Brooks' past, they uncovered a trail of secrets that had been carefully buried. He was not the man Emma Carter thought he was. In fact, he wasn't even the man he claimed to be. His real name was Daniel Reeves, and 5 years earlier, he had been at the center of another tragedy, one that now seemed far from accidental. His previous wife, Lauren Reeves, had died under mysterious circumstances. According to the official report, she had drowned while on a weekend trip to a lake with Daniel. He had called 911, claiming she had gone for a swim and never resurfaced. Her body was found 2 days later, And while her death was ruled an accidental drowning, there were small details that didn't quite add up. There had been bruises on her wrists, scratches along her arms, injuries that didn't necessarily indicate a struggle, but were concerning nonetheless. At the time, Daniel had appeared devastated. He had cooperated fully with investigators and had a seemingly airtight alibi. Without hard evidence of foul play, the case was closed, and he walked away a free man. Shortly after Lauren's death, Daniel had moved states, legally changed his last name, and started over. By the time he met Emma, there was no trace of his past life. No one who knew him now had any idea about the tragedy he had left behind. He had created a new identity, one free of suspicion, and once again, he had found a woman who trusted him completely. But this time he had mistakes. With Lauren he had been careful. There had been no clear signs of violence, no trace of intent. With Emma, everything was different. The brutality of her murder, the rushed disposal of her body, the desperate attempt to flee, it all pointed to a crime driven by fear and rage rather than careful planning. Investigators now believed Emma had discovered something about Daniel's past, something he had fought to keep hidden for years. Perhaps she had stumbled across an old document, a news article, or a piece of evidence linking him to his previous life. Whatever it was, it had been enough to make him snap. With this new information, authorities intensified their search. Daniel was now wanted not just for Emma's murder, but as a potential suspect in Lauren's death as well. His face was plastered across news stations and online bulletins. Airports, bus stations, and border checkpoints were put on alert. Detectives knew they were dealing with a man who had successfully reinvented himself once. If he managed to disappear again, he might never be found. As days passed with no sign of him, frustration grew. He had no close family, no known associates, no patterns that could give investigators a clue about where he might have gone. He had vanished, just as he had before. But this time law enforcement wasn't going to let him slip away. The hunt for Daniel Brooks had only just begun. Daniel Brooks had been on the run for nearly 2 weeks, but the walls were closing in. His face was everywhere: news reports, online alerts, and even digital billboards in major cities. Airports and border crossings were on high alert, making it nearly impossible for him to leave the country unnoticed. Authorities knew he was desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. The break in the case came when a motel employee in a small town 3 states away recognized Daniel from the news. He had checked in under a false name and paid in cash, but his face was unmistakable. The employee quietly alerted the police, who moved in quickly. When officers arrived, they found Daniel's car parked outside the room. There were signs that he had been planning to leave soon. His bag was packed, and a map with a route marked toward the Mexican border was found on the nightstand. He had almost slipped away, but time had run out. Law enforcement surrounded the motel, blocking every possible escape route. They knocked on the door, ordering him to surrender. For several tense minutes, there was no response. Then, the door creaked open and Daniel stepped out with his hands raised. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He knew it was over. At his trial, the full horror of his crimes came to light. Prosecutors revealed the extent of Emma's injuries, emphasizing the brutality of the attack. The jury listened in stunned silence as forensic experts detailed how she had been beaten, stabbed multiple times, and then hastily transported to the wooded area where she was buried. There was no question about his guilt. The evidence was overwhelming. Even more chilling was the new investigation into Lauren Reeves' death. With Daniel's past now exposed, authorities reopened the case, re-examining the circumstances surrounding her drowning. Though time had erased much of the physical evidence, inconsistencies in Daniel's original statements, combined with the clear pattern of violence in Emma's case, painted a damning picture. The accidental drowning that had once been accepted without question now looked disturbingly like a premeditated murder. Daniel sat emotionless throughout the trial, showing no signs of remorse. When the verdict was read guilty of first-degree murder, Emma's family wept. Justice had been served, but nothing could bring her back. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would never be able to hurt another woman again. For Emma's loved ones, the pain never fully faded. The man she had trusted with her future had stolen everything from her. What had seemed like the perfect love story had been a carefully constructed illusion, hiding a monster beneath the surface. Her story became a warning to others sometimes. The most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most perfect. As the years passed, Daniel Brooks became just another inmate, forgotten by the world. But Emma Carter's name lived on, a reminder of a life taken too soon and the darkness that can hide behind even the brightest smiles.